I want to take a minute before we get into this chapter of On the Brink to thank our amazing sponsors. They are making it possible for us to bring you programs on a continuing basis. And I'm happy to say we have a new sponsor to welcome today. It's the Donna Frank team of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Blake Realtors. They have 18 years experience in this business. They know what they are doing. This team has consistently exceeded sales expectations. And what that means for you is if you're buying or selling or investing or whatever else you can do with real estate, you want to contact them. The team is led by a friend of mine, Donna Federico. She's amazing. And you can find out more about her and what she can do for you by going to Donna Fed, that's DONAFED at gmail.com. And while I'm thanking folks, not just our sponsors, but our listeners deserve a big hand. And my appreciation there, you are coming to us in increasing numbers, I'm happy to say. But I need you to do more than just listen. Whatever your platform calls for, sharing, rating, ranking, subscribing, really could use that. Those of you listening on Apple, please give us a 5-star review. In fact, if you're allowed to do this, if your religion allows it, vote twice and give us 10 stars and all that. It'd be great. And the reason for that is the more we are listed and liked, the more sponsors I get. And that means more money comes in. I might actually get to pay panelists, something the local NPR station doesn't want to do, but I do. So please, I can't do it without your support and your continued listening and clicking of buttons as required by your platforms. Thank you. Welcome back. I thank you for joining us again for a new chapter of an Armeo on the Brink. We are talking about a topic that's not very much talked about lately, and that is Ukraine. Remember that war? And to do so, to bring up this topic, I have two amazing speakers. One is Brian Bonner. Brian is in Kyiv right now. He's a senior editor for Geopolitical Intelligence Services. And from 2008 to 2021, he was the chief editor of the Kyiv Post. He knows a little bit about this country and about what's going on there. We'll be talking to him shortly. I also want to introduce my second guest, who's an old boss, a longtime friend, a fabulous journalist. That's Drew Sullivan. He is the founder, one of the founders, and still the publisher of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. So he too knows about Ukraine. Your group was writing about Ukraine and corruption and security issues long before Americans tuned into it with the war that began about 2 years ago. So welcome. Brian, can we start off with you telling us a little bit about what it's like living in Ukraine and Kyiv 2 years almost into this war?
Well, it was rough for the first month. I was out of the country for the first month. I came back at the 1 month period after Ukraine had won the Battle of Kyiv. But it took another year before Ukraine got really good air defenses. And now in the capital, to be honest, we are living in a little bit of quite a bubble because the air defenses are so good. They're intercepting Russia's missiles and drones at a very high rate. But so the economy is okay. It's rolling. There's obviously problems, but I say bubble because that could be bursting very soon if military aid does not arrive very soon, and if economic aid does not arrive very soon. So it's very precarious. The mood right now is very anxious, fearful even, and a lot of uncertainty as we head into the holiday season and the new year.
Brian, you spoke a little bit about the difficulty of travel. As an American, you sometimes want to get back to this country. It's a bit of a trek now.
Yes, I've been out of the country for 5 times this year, and each one is an ordeal because we haven't had commercial air service obviously since the start of the war almost 2 years ago. So it's an overnight train ride wherever you want to go, and the trains don't move quickly, but they move reliably. That's one of the things that Ukraine's during the war. You need the army and you need the railway, and we have both. Uh, it's been a little difficult and exhausting. So, but it's doable. It just takes time and takes a lot of energy out of you.
And Drew Sullivan, your organized crime and corruption reporting project has not stopped reporting from Ukraine over the past couple of years, but you've had to make some adjustments and some arrangements to do it right. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the centers that we work with in Ukraine and our partners and our editors there are investigative reporters. And in a war situation, investigative reporting is extremely difficult to do. The government of Ukraine shut down access to a large number of public records in order to prevent Russia from using them to undermine Ukraine. And so there's less access to information. People are security conscious, and so consequently they're not talking as much. It's wartime footing for the government, and so the information tends to be closely guarded and carefully curated before it goes out. And so and our expertise is follow the money corruption. And most of the traditional ways of dealing with things and tenders have all changed up during the war for, again, security reasons and for political reasons. And so consequently, it is very difficult to do the traditional work that we do, although we are doing some of it and continue to do some of it on a regular basis. It's just more difficult. The other thing is there's a more legitimate need. News you can use in war is what's happening and what the situation is and what the problems are. And so there's also a need to document what's been going on in Ukraine. I mean, I don't think, even though all the stories that have gone out, people do not realize how incredibly vicious this war has been and how few laws of the Geneva Convention and other things have been followed, if any. And so consequently, they've spent a lot of time documenting war crimes and atrocities that have been happening in areas around the country, especially early on, but even to a certain degree now. There's a number of, basically murders that take place amongst not only the civilian population, but in the military population by Russia and the Russian army. And consequently, a lot of this really, truly has to be documented. And so a lot of time has been spent. And then, a third problem has been that, our partners have had, its best reporters pulled into the military, where often they serve in intelligence and other branches where their skills are particularly good and so useful for the military. And so we're dealing with a lot less experienced reporters. So we're spending more time training people and getting young reporters up to speed.
That's really interesting. You're listening to Drew Sullivan, who's has a team of reporters working in Ukraine, and to Brian Bonner, who is working and living in Kiev. I'd like to hear from both of you about just what are the consequences of the American media, especially ignoring Ukraine, and they have done that since October 7th when Hamas launched an attack in Israel. Is this going to be like Afghanistan, where we had a 20-year war and you never read about it in the newspaper or heard it on the radio? Ryan?
Well, that's certainly the big fear. It was stunning. It was almost like overnight, every international correspondent got on the same bus and got out of Ukraine and ended up in Gaza. I mean, we see the same correspondents who were here one day and now reporting from Gaza the next. Now that's obvious because that they follow the big latest story. And to be honest, the war was becoming a grind. It is hard to come up with great new angles that people want to to consume, either read or listen to or view. So this is a huge problem, and Ukraine feels it, being off the news. Still a lot of great coverage going on here for people who want to do that. But more than anything, everybody is really watching what's going on in Congress. It's before I came on, I mean, I checked with some of my friends who are at the war front now, and basically got confirmation that they are all exhausted, worried, nervous, feeling like they're alone. Salaries are being delayed. The war bonus that they get, they're supposed to get a big daily bonus for being on the front lines. It amounts to about 2,700 a month, not being paid. Low on people, low on ammunition, low on weapons. Don't know what's going to happen next. So, I mean, that's the situation I got today from a friend at one of the hottest spots in Avdiivka, and you can read lots of stories about that saying the same thing. So we're in a very big situation. I hope Drew is the optimist in this conversation, because coming off a counteroffensive that didn't bring the results that Ukraine wanted and its supporters wanted, and now for Ukraine's future really to be caught up into American domestic politics, it's going to be very unnerving weeks. I think people hope that come January, that the 60 billion that's earmarked for Ukraine will come through, but even that's not going to demonstrably change things. It'll keep Ukraine in the fight for another year, combined with if Europe gets its 50 billion through, if Hungary doesn't oppose that. So that's the situation. It's grim.
So, Drew, are you any more optimistic? And you are also a longtime observer and critic of American media. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it really, what the media is doing is not surprising, as Brian points out. I mean, it's go to the hot story of the day, what people care about, and the problem in Ukraine is it's now in the grind part of the war, and front lines are not changing much, and the death and the destruction is still high, but it's being played out in beyond people's vision. But I mean, I think the problem here is that you can't look at the Ukraine war and the Gaza war as separate and unconnected items. This is a global political landscape where there's a lot of things at play, and Hamas met with Putin before the attack and immediately after the attack. There's no doubt that it's in Russia's interest that an attack took place, to spread the amount of resources out to a larger number of people and to distract people. It also puts more geopolitical chips on the table. There's been 5 or 7 coups in Africa recently, all orchestrated by Russia, and so consequently, it's very possible that Putin is trying to put as many political chips on the table that he can trade, and what he wants to trade for is Ukraine. He doesn't care about any of the other places, and he really wants to trade for Ukraine. And we've heard from sources that there were attempts to start wars in the Republic of Srpska and Bosnia. There was an attempt to start a war in Kosovo. And so you have to look at this larger political landscape, and what Russia is doing and manipulating around the world, and that really American media has been completely ignorant of and has not looked at it. And I'm not saying necessarily that's all happening and that's what's being orchestrated, but there's a lot of evidence that could in fact be the case, and it needs to be looked at much more closer.
I have long talked about this, Drew, that these wars and other trouble that you didn't even mention, I want to get into it, like trouble in West Africa that's suddenly stirred up, Kosovo you mentioned,
Right.
even Taipei, it's all connected. And we're going to get into that more in just a few minutes. And our Mayo on the Brink is brought to you by Orchard Air LLC. And this is exciting. From January through April, it's offering reduced pricing for short-term rentals of its beautiful Karen's Place retreats in the woods of Burlington. I've been there. It's gorgeous. Karen's can accommodate up to 12 people, and they take individual bookings too. And parts of all the proceeds always they give to the Alzheimer's Association. For more information, go to Facebook. Facebook.com/Karen's Place VT, capital VT. And Karen's, let me tell you, is Karins. Peacock Pots is a founding sponsor of On the Brink. Be sure to go to their website. It's peacockpots.com if you're looking for kind of unique holiday presents. I love they have these stoneware mugs, bowls, plates. I'm going to spend my entire salary this week there, I'm sure. We're talking with Drew Sullivan at the moment. He's a founder and a publisher still at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Center. And we're talking about how the Ukraine war fading into the dust, as we in America are all concerned about Gaza. They're actually connected. I'm struck by the Jewish question, which is spread across both wars. Zelensky is Jewish. There's a huge population of Jewish people in Ukraine. And yet Putin says he's trying to stop Nazis. And on the other end of the world, in Gaza, we have Israelis being accused of Nazi-like tactics, genocide in Gaza. That's very twisted to me. Is that part of the bigger picture that you see at play here, Drew, that Putin has learned to take advantage of anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. He's both anti-Semitic and willing to use anti-Semitism as a tool in his propaganda. And Russia is a serial liar. They'll really say whatever it is necessary to boost their propaganda and the way they see the world. And most countries, to a certain extent, have that same willingness to stretch the truth. But Russia is engaged in flat out propaganda all the time. It's a propaganda run a country, and it really is. They will use any tool at their disposal at any time. And, I suspect a significant amount of propaganda is aimed at Republican circles to basically loosen the support in Republican circles for Ukraine and to kind of make these demands that, that the border wall in border Mexico is more important than these larger geopolitical issues, and that we should be worried about abortion rather than the war in Ukraine, and these kind of red herrings that are always put out, and it's all designed to promote a particular set of goals that is in the interest of Russia. And of course, their main goal in the United States is supporting a Republican president and undermining the war in Ukraine as best they can. And so you will see classic Russian propaganda in Republican, social media circles, constantly. I mean, Elon Musk has created a whole channel now, X, which is essentially pushing, Russian propaganda at a rate that I've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this is the new war. I mean, this is information war is as important as on the field war. And there's a reality in Russia that's true. American media is really still pretty blind to how all this works. They really see the world from a very American perspective, and that American perspective is missing all these other battlefields that are out there.
I am talking in this chapter of On the Brink with two longtime reporters and residents, or at least visitors, to Ukraine. This is the war that America seems to be forgetting. Brian Bonner, longtime editor at the Kyiv Post, are you seeing the same sort of short-sightedness that Drew talked about in the American press, in the world press, and in the local press? I can't imagine that they're blind to the machinations of Putin.
Oh no, it's in the local press. It's all war every day, every minute on all outlets. And there's wartime censorship. So the down and this unified broadcast system. So unfortunately, in Ukraine, we live again in our own bubble, which is victory is around the corner. We're going to win. We highlight all Russia's problems, but you have to really step out. And when you do step out, you see that Russia is on a wartime footing. The sanctions are weak. They're not working. Russia had record oil and gas revenue. I think Bloomberg reported this year. Putin has put the economy in a wartime footing. At least 115 billion in defense spending next year, at least, easily 10 times more than Ukraine. And the problem is there's no negotiation that Ukrainians can see, because the object is not just territory or keeping out of NATO. Those are all sort of just, more excuses. The object is to destroy Ukraine as a nation. And I don't think it'll happen. But, for now, people are voicing, wow, if worse comes to worse, we could have a government in exile, a disbanded army that has no money and no weapons, and millions more refugees fleeing. Now, if that sounds too far-fetched, keep in mind, in neighboring Belarus, there's a government in exile, and already we have lost, Ukraine has lost 6.3 million people, who many of them are not coming back because they've been gone for 2 years and they found new lives elsewhere. So it's, the attention is still 24/7 by the locals, but you can't escape the fact that people see, if you go back and so many histories will be written. Obviously, Russia is to blame first and foremost. Ukraine has its share of blame because it squandered a lot of its 30 years of independence on corruption and self-dealing, and a lot of the corruption was fueled by Russia, and they didn't build a defense that they needed. There were warning signs all over history in Ukraine that this was going to happen, and indeed it did. And then you can go forward, and the Biden administration. I mean, America does not have a great track record of standing by allies. So I don't think anybody really believes as long as it takes, because it's not in the politicians' hands. And the Biden administration never articulated or never put forward, and neither did Europe, for that matter, which Europe is kind of defenseless by itself, a strategy for victory. Even Jake Sullivan recently was saying the strategy is to put Ukraine in a strong position for negotiations. That's not a victory strategy. No, and so all these politicians who say as much as it takes, as long as it takes, I mean, nobody is listening, because it's obviously not true. And politically, it's going to be a really tough lift. I think they'll get it over the finish line one more year, but after that, oh my God, just take a look at the domestic politics in Europe and in America, and you tell me where you see that there's going to be stronger support for Ukraine. And the Ukraine,
Drew, you're hearing Brian say that Putin's ultimate goal is the destruction of Ukraine. Does it stop there, or do you see something more sinister, more global?
Well, I mean, the policy with Russia has always been that there are three countries that is owned by them, which, is Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine. And they've been pretty consistent in that policy for many, many years. Putin has always considered Ukraine as part of Russia. And so, that's not surprising. Whether that goes beyond, I mean, Putin is a corrupt autocrat who basically has built a kleptocracy. Those are inherently unstable governments. And they need war and conflict to keep their people on board. And consequently, you've seen Putin not only attack Ukraine, but he's attacked Moldova. He's pulled apart parts of Ossetia and Georgia and other places to be part of his area. And so he needs to do that to control things and to put pressure on other people. And so consequently, you I don't think there's an inherent desire to take over the world. But there's clearly an idea that he needs to reform his what he considers Russia, and to keep those out of the hands of the West. But then after that, regardless of what his intentions are, it will be a large, unstable nuclear power. And that's dangerous and that's problematic. And the sad thing is there's a unique opportunity here to really permanently undermine Russia by supporting Ukraine. It's in the interest of everybody in the world to kind of put Russia in its place, and we're really failing to do that, because too many of our people are buying into the Russian propaganda.
Well, I want to make a point on this, put a point on this. Ukraine seems to me always has to be more of an immediate threat to U.S. national security and to global security than the situation in the Middle East. I'm not saying pick a war here, but to ignore one and put all the emphasis on the other seems very short-sighted.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, the Palestinian issue has basically been fairly segregated. The Palestinians have very little support from other Arab countries. They're increasingly separating themselves. This is a huge problem for Israel, and it's never going to be solved until there are leaders on both sides, who want an agreement. I mean, it took Ireland 800 years to get there. It's going to be a long time. There hasn't been the last leader in either side to support actually solving this was Rabin, and he was murdered for it. So there really, there's a long way to go. But it's a contained problem in some ways. You do have Hamas, you do have Hezbollah, but Hezbollah didn't join this. So it's somewhat of a contained problem. Russia is not a contained problem. They work with places like Turkey and Iran and China. They're undermining democracy around the world. They're undermining systems, banking systems and other things. They're major money launderers. They're very closely tied to Dubai. Bad people work through them without any problems. They support their organized crime networks. It's part of state policy to have organized crime. And so it really is a global bad actor that is known for starting wars.
Right.
And so this is really the far more bigger problem. It doesn't have the visceral, emotions of the Palestinian Israeli conflict, but it is far, far more important.
It's really interesting. To switch a topic here, Brian, in the past week, the Department of Justice charged 4 Russian soldiers with torturing an American. The first time in 30 years since we had a war crime statute that it was actually used. Statute, not statue. Is there anything to this? Does it make any bit of difference at all that the Department of Justice wants to hold Russia accountable?
Well, I think it's a start. I mean, there are enough war crimes happening here to keep prosecutors and courts going for decades. I don't know that we're ever going to see the justice, but it is a good start to have at least this acknowledgement of that. There's a lot of things that that still have yet to happen on war crimes, and I don't know how they'll ever be resolved. I mean, there's thousands of cases now, and who's going to hear them, and what's the chances of catching anybody? And then there's the whole financial thing with all the frozen Russian assets, which would seem to be, many people have argued that, because Western taxpayers are getting tired of funding Ukraine, even though it's a very, very tiny part of American and European budgets, that this should have happened a long time ago, that the law should have been changed to basically say that if a country invades another country illegally, like Russia did, that their assets can be seized and used to help arm the victim and to help the victim rebuild and to help the victim's economy. That still hasn't happened, and we're 2 years into the war. So all these judicial, legal remedies, as you can see, are very slow and patchwork.
Very slow and patchwork, as this whole war has been. I have tons more questions, and I'm going to get to them in just a minute here. We're speaking to Drew Sullivan, who's the publisher of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Center, and to Brian Bonner, who is a longtime editor and still works in Kyiv. Music for our On the Brink podcast was composed by David Keckley, and his works are available through Pine Valley Press. It's a Williamstown, Massachusetts music publishing firm. On the Brink is also proud to be sponsored by, I also have to say, I love being fed by them as well, the Apple Barn and Country Bake Shop. That's in Burlington, Vermont. They specialize in delivering the real local Vermont. For like a half a century now, locals and tourists, all of them, have found their way to the barn. I'm sure it's by following the scent of those pies and donuts, which are irresistible. That's the Apple Barn. Their website's easy to find. It's just all one word, theapplebarn.com. I encourage you to go there and go to the real place. Why did the much ballyhooed Ukrainian counteroffensive fail in the past year? What do you think? Brian Bonner.
Well, I read a lot of generals and watch a lot of news. And basically, the original sin is that after Ukraine went on a massive offensive, retaking Kyiv, Kharkiv, Kherson, these big three areas in the capital, the east, and the south, that there was a lull, and Russia had a year to dig in, mine the place, build up fortifications, and they did. All the while, Ukraine was not moving on the offensive and didn't have the weaponry, it says. And then there's a huge, to summarize all the investigations, there's a huge mismatch between how the West wants Ukraine to fight and how Ukraine thinks it needs to fight. And one of the biggest things is that the West wanted Ukraine to do combined arms operations without air superiority, without fighter jets. A lot of the weapons, which as I understand it, no Western military would even think of doing that. And, it's been well documented that Ukraine's, major counteroffensive went nowhere, and they suffered heavy losses and then abandoned it and shifted to a much slower strategy because they were not able to have all the elements that they needed to move forward. Now, getting Ukraine to a position of military superiority now is very difficult. And in fact, they switched from offense to defense, several weeks ago, and that means that's the best. The best things are the best case scenario right now appears to be that the lines remain frozen while the weather is frozen, and that neither side makes big advances. So that's my understanding. I think that's pretty much the consensus on on why the counteroffensive did not work.
Drew, I want you to jump in here. From your perspective, what has to happen in the West or in the United States to help Ukraine defeat Russia?
Well, I mean, we've got to unblock the assistance. I mean, regardless of whether Ukraine has the ability now to defeat Russia, we have to unblock the assistance just to keep the situation from going backwards. And so, I think it would have been in our interest. There was always a fear from the beginning that the West would give enough arms for Ukraine to defend itself, but not to really free itself. And that's really kind of what has happened. It puts us in a situation where you have really an unstable thing because it's not like Putin is ever going to give up on this. He's never going to give up on Ukraine. He will do, he ran Ukraine up to 2014 through Yanukovych and corrupt politicians. And essentially it was a vassal state. But, since that time, he wants it back. He wants the resources, he wants the pride. And so consequently, if you get stuck in a situation where you have Ukraine partially in the hands of Russia, there will never be an incentive for him to leave, and he will just look for another opportunity, and he will plan and he will put his whole economy and military towards an eventual restarting of these same hostilities with a much better plan and more resources. And so consequently, you really wanted to get him completely out so that he would have to cross borders again to do that. And that's very, very unfortunate. The best thing to do now is to really restock Ukraine as much as possible. The high-tech weaponry has really been a serious problem for Russia. They haven't learned anything on the ground fighting. They continue to expend huge amounts of personnel at a frightening pace, and they seem willing to continue doing that. And so, consequently, there has to be a political breakthrough really in the West to get the arms, to get the air superiority. If they get long range weapons, which they do seem to now have, some of the long range weapons, maybe most of them, at least not in large numbers, but in small enough numbers, there's at least a precedent set. They get the F-16 fighter jets. They could theoretically slowly pull territory away from Russia on this. But there's always the threat that Russia will bring in large numbers of troops in other parts of the country and continue to make this difficult. Ukraine can fight a limited war right now, but it's just literally running out of people.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't have enough soldiers. The number of experienced soldiers, which was really a huge distinguishing factor in the war. They had smart, good soldiers who were trained. Those guys are dying off at an unfortunate rate, and a lot of people have fled the country and are not going to come back because of the probability they would have to serve in the military, and large numbers of people are hiding in the country. So there isn't there's a diminishing return on the soldiery that you need to fight this war. And so consequently, it's going to, I think, pretty much be defensive the rest of the way out with limited attacks, strategic attacks to just basically, to deplete Russia of any ability to build up a strong attack formation.
Putin just announced this past week that he was running for another term, which may be the answer to this question I'm posing now is, have we lost hope that dissenting voices in Russia will change his mind, will say enough of the death and the war, we don't want it? Have we lost hope for that? Drew, first.
There are no dissenting voices in Russia.
Yeah, tell us about your Russian reporters, your partners there.
Yeah, all of our reporters have left. We've been named an undesirable organization. It's 5 years imprisonment if you even deal with us in Russia. So, we're in a situation where we have to do things in other ways to report on Russia. But Putin's done some very smart things. I mean, he's paying large sums of money for the death of these people who are dying in huge numbers. Something Russia has a lot of money. And so in these rural areas, if you lose a son, you can buy a house.
Oh,
And if you go into, these small towns, they have money that they've never had in their history. They have resources that they've never had in their history, and they've paid it with their young men's lives. But in the end, they're financially better off, and so consequently, there's no the people who would really have fought this have left. And so
wow.
you've basically got, the sheeple left, who are going to who it's more important to them to have a strong leader, and to have this image of Russia than to actually have a functioning, Russia. And so we can expect that basically no one in the country is going to protest Putin, at any level that's going to make any difference. The question will always be whether internally, whether the Siloviki will do something. That's kind of the leaders of the intelligence and other communities, whether they do something on it. But the history in Russia has always been that these leaders live out their long lives and then die, and then they're hated for 20 years, and then they're recovered after 20 years and made a hero again.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Brian, on the front lines in Kyiv, there must be depression or despair that anything will change within Russia. I want to ask you about that. And also, has all talk of corruption within Ukraine stopped? Is that just unpatriotic to bring up now?
Uh, People don't expect anything, a political change from Russia, even with or without Putin. And Putin is feeling very, very good right now. I think that the feeling in Ukraine is that it's the hatred, the imperialism, the idea that Ukraine is their country runs pretty deep in Russia right now. And as far as corruption, there's a feeling. I mean, as Drew said, it's very difficult to write about it. There are still journalists who are. A lot of my team at the Kyiv Independent, now partners with Drew and OCCRP, are doing the same. Many others are trying to. And corruption scandals, we've had huge. I mean, during this war, we've lost, a defense minister, a National Bank of Ukraine governor, security service head, general prosecutor, on and on and on. And most, if not all of these departures have this taint and whiff of corruption. Now, people who know Ukraine know the nuances of Ukraine very well, know that it is, a highly corrupt country, and there's a huge amount of money coming in here that is not accountable. This is like a recipe for trouble. I mean, that's the downside of Ukraine. The upside of Ukraine, of course, is it's a democracy that's fought autocracy for a long time. As Drew said, they broke away basically from Russia in 2014. The clean break. So there are these positive elements going on, but still, all those institutional things to stop corruption and to prevent it and to punish it are still not existent in Ukraine. Ukraine has going for it a strong civil society, funded often by Western partners, and it has a robust independent media, which is, I mean, not enough
Right.
cash, not enough reporters. So that's going on. But basically, the feeling is, I mean, it shifted from like, we're not going to criticize. Now there's a lot of political infighting. And there has to be, with Zelensky, he has to show, especially to the Republicans in Congress and the other skeptics about aid, that this money is going to be well spent. And so a lot of times, unfortunately, in Ukraine, you get demonstrative like arrests and charges, and then they just fall off the radar down the road. But it's going on. I mean, I know people feel at a gut level that, corruption now is, during times of war, is the worst sin you can commit against your country, and they would not have any pity on those who
That's
who are
actually a
engaging
good
it.
point. Yeah, that's a great point. We are down to time for one last question, and I'm torn between which of these to ask you. So I'm going to break the rules of journalism and put a double-edged question out here. You can answer both or either. And it is: are you disappointed that Zelensky did not get to be named Time's Sexiest Man of the Year? That honor went to Taylor Swift's football boyfriend. And what would you say to Republicans who are now completely blocking aid, it would seem, for Ukraine? So start with Drew first.
Yeah, I'm the first part of the question I will ignore because I'm really not suited to make that assessment. But I will say that to Republicans, I mean, this is really counterproductive to the interest of the United States, what they're doing. And really they have to look at why they're doing it and the reasons for why they're doing it. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, maybe it's just the stupidity of this populist movement of, saying, let's hold off for our, let's hold out for our pet peeves and everything's about the border wall. But everybody knows that that's not true. Everybody knows that really what's going on here is, interests are at play, jockeying for things that are important right now. They know that Ukraine is important to the Biden administration. And so there's a political component of it, but there's very clearly a Russian propaganda point to this. And they really have to look at, what's in the interest of the American public. And, everybody has tried to tell them all sorts of things. So I'm not going to try to tell them anything that they should know. But, this will affect things for the next 2 decades. And a mistake here can be a really serious long-term problem that will rear its head and cost the lives of a lot more young men before this is over if they make bad decisions.
Okay, and Brian, how about your answer to my double-edged question?
Well, Zelensky's star power has faded. He knows it. The world knows it. He was a novelty, and in the first year, and now he has a hard time getting an audience.
Yeah,
so much less covers. So this is a really bad situation. I think with Biden, I mean, he put himself in a box. He needs to actually do whatever the Republicans say on the border. Anything, get it done.
Wow.
Because if he does not get the aid to Ukraine and Ukraine unravels quickly, oh my gosh, there's no chance for re-election at all, especially coming on the heels of Afghanistan fiasco. I sense the Democrats don't understand the importance of that issue to voters, and they had better, or else he could lose it all. So I would, if I were him, I would wrap it into, forget the bargaining. Just, okay, take the Republican blueprint and say, can we get the Ukraine aid if we agree to the border concessions, and do it? Because as Drew said, if Ukraine unravels, the costs and the consequences are just enormous. Just enormous. And nobody knows that probably better in this part of the world than Poland, which is actually the only country that is really, really, really trying to have a first-rate. They may end up with the most powerful military in Europe for a reason, because Poles just don't want to. They don't want to have Russia on their border or even close to their border, and they don't want the entire more millions of Ukrainians to relocate west. So that's where we are.
So I hope in this episode of On the Brink that we have helped to remind Americans how important the issue is, the war is in Ukraine, and to stop ignoring it. We end our podcast with a toast, and I want to make one today to the journalists working in, or at least around, Ukraine and Russia to get out the real word of what's going on. They are risking their lives. They have everything at stake. I send money, I have for months now since the war began, to the Kyiv Independent. I encourage you to do the same. Write to me, I'll tell you how to do it. They need it, we need it. So thank you to my incredibly deep sourced and knowledgeable guests this week, Brian Bonner and Drew Sullivan. You were just terrific. Thank you for a great conversation.